Eleanor Preston adjusted the diamond clasp on her pearl necklace, her reflection in the grand ballroom's gilded mirror showing a woman supremely confident, a queen in her court. She surveyed the room, a glittering sea of status and wealth she had meticulously cultivated. Her gaze fell for a moment on a young woman standing near the orchestra, a plain gray dress amidst a riot of jewel tones. Clara Vance, a nobody, a junior architect apparently. Eleanor had made it her personal project for the evening to subtly, elegantly put the girl in her place. She thought she had succeeded. She believed her cutting remarks, veiled as charming observations, had landed perfectly, reminding everyone of the unshakable hierarchy of their world. What Eleanor didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that every quiet smile Clara offered in return was not a mark of defeat, but a deposit into a ledger of grievances. She did not know that the quiet young architect was not just an employee, but the owner of the very ground beneath the Prestons' planned billion-dollar legacy project. Within 3 months, that simple, devastating fact would unravel Eleanor's entire world. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, inescapable click of a pen signing a contract. We love seeing stories where arrogance meets its match, don't we? It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't always the loudest voice in the room. If you agree and you want to see how this story of quiet power unfolds, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back to the beginning, to the dinner party where the first seeds of this spectacular downfall were sown. It had started, as these things so often do, with an invitation that was less a courtesy and more a command. The Prestons were hosting a dinner to celebrate the preliminary selection of a design firm for their magnum opus, the Preston Center for the Arts. It was to be the defining monument of their family's legacy, a structure that would shout their importance from the city skyline for a century to come. Clara's firm, Sterling and Thorne, was one of 2 finalists. She was attending not as a lead architect, a role she meticulously avoided in public, but as a supporting team member alongside her colleague, Amelia. Amelia, bright and ambitious, was dating the Preston's son, Julian, a fact that she believed gave their firm an insurmountable edge. The Preston estate was less a home and more a principality, a long, winding driveway cut through acres of manicured woodland, arriving at a sprawling stone manor that seemed to bully the landscape into submission. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and money. Richard Preston, the family patriarch, greeted them with a handshake that felt like a test of strength. He was a man built of broad shoulders and sharper angles, his eyes constantly calculating, assessing, and dismissing. "Amelia, wonderful to see you," he boomed, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He then turned to Clara, his gaze sweeping over her simple, dark blue sheath dress with a flicker of something between pity and contempt. "And you must be part of the team." "Clara Vance," she said, her voice even and calm. She met his gaze without flinching. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Preston." He had already turned away, guiding Amelia toward his wife. Eleanor Preston was a masterpiece of preserved elegance, her blonde hair sculpted into a flawless chignon, her smile a beautiful, dangerous weapon. She embraced Amelia with performative warmth. "Amelia, darling, you look absolutely stunning. That color is divine on you," Eleanor cooed, her eyes flicking to Clara, who stood a pace behind. "And you brought a friend." "This is my colleague, Clara Vance," Amelia said, a slight flush of discomfort on her cheeks. "Clara is one of our most thoughtful designers." Eleanor's smile tightened. "How lovely. It's so important to have thoughtful people. We must find you a drink." She said it with the tone one might use to placate a lost child. She gestured vaguely towards a bar swarmed with men in bespoke suits, a clear dismissal. Clara simply nodded, a serene expression on her face. "Thank you, Mrs. Preston." Throughout the evening, the humiliations were small but relentless, like 1,000 tiny cuts. At the dinner table, a vast expanse of polished mahogany, Eleanor made a great show of discussing her recent trip to Milan for Fashion Week. The fabrics, the artistry, it's a world away, isn't it? She mused, her eyes finding Clara across the table. One gets so used to seeing things that are merely functional. The implication was as clear as the crystal goblets shimmering under the chandelier. Clara's dress, her entire presence, was merely functional. Clara took a slow sip of water. In her mind, she pictured the structural diagrams of a cantilevered bridge, the clean, honest lines of steel bearing an immense load with grace. Function, she thought, was its own form of beauty, the most profound, in fact. Julian Preston, who possessed his father's arrogance without the accompanying force of will, leaned forward. Mother's right. Image is everything. You can have the best product in the world, but if it's not packaged correctly, no one will buy it. That's the first thing they teach you at Wharton. Amelia laughed a little too loudly, nodding in agreement. Julian is a genius at branding. Richard Preston cleared his throat, commanding the table's attention. Which brings us to the project. The Preston Center cannot be just a building. It must be a statement. We need a landmark, a beacon. We need something that makes people stop and stare. He looked down the table at Clara. Your firm, Sterling and Thorne. Thorne was the old master, wasn't he? All that quiet minimalism. Very 20th century. The dismissal of Marcus Thorne, her mentor, the man who had been a father to her, sent a cold, sharp sting through Clara's chest. He had passed away 2 years prior, leaving her not just his fortune and his firm, but his entire life's philosophy, a legacy of architectural integrity she had sworn to protect. The Prestons knew Thorne was deceased. They did not know that the quiet woman at their table was his chosen heir, the silent, controlling partner of the firm that bore his name. Marcus Thorne believed that a building should serve the people within it, not the ego of the person who commissioned it, Clara stated, her voice soft but carrying a sudden weight that made several guests pause their conversations. He believed architecture was a form of public service, not a billboard. A hush fell over the table. Richard Preston's eyes narrowed. He was not accustomed to being contradicted, especially by someone he had already categorized as insignificant. Eleanor let out a tinkling, artificial laugh. Oh, that's a very noble idea, dear. Very idealistic. But this is the real world. We're not building a library in a small town. We are building a legacy. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on her husband's arm. And our legacy will be spectacular, not serviceable. The word hung in the air, another calculated insult. Clara felt the familiar shape of the silver fountain pen in her small clutch. She ran her thumb over its cool, smooth surface. A gift from Marcus on her graduation. To build worlds, Clara, he had said, his voice raspy with illness, but always build them with a conscience. She looked at the faces around the table, the Prestons, smug and secure in their fortress of wealth. Amelia, her friend, looking away, choosing ambition over loyalty. The other guests, all carefully neutral, waiting to see which way the wind of power would blow. Clara gave another small, serene smile. Spectacular, she repeated softly, as if considering the word for the first time. It's certainly a goal to aspire to. The conversation moved on, but the moment had shifted something. Clara was no longer just a guest. She was an object of suspicion. Her quiet dignity was mistaken for defiance. For the rest of the evening, she was pointedly ignored, a ghost at the feast. As she was leaving, Amelia caught her arm by the door, her expression a mixture of apology and frustration. Clara, why did you have to say that? About Thorne's philosophy, she whispered urgently. You made things awkward. I'm trying to build a bridge here. A bridge needs a strong foundation, Amelia, Clara replied, her voice gentle. You can't build one on flattery and compromise. It won't hold. Amelia pulled back, her face hardening. This is the biggest project of our careers. Maybe you can afford to be idealistic. I can't. Clara looked at her friend, seeing for the first time the chasm that had opened between them. It wasn't about a building anymore. It was about two different ways of seeing the world. As the valet brought her modest sedan to the front, a stark contrast to the lineup of gleaming luxury cars, she could feel Eleanor Preston's eyes on her back, a final, pitying glance that confirmed Clara's status as a complete and utter irrelevance. Driving away from the oppressive grandeur of the estate, back toward the quiet, clean lines of her own apartment, Clara felt not anger, but a profound and chilling clarity. The Prestons thought they were choosing a design. They thought they were in control. In reality, they were taking a test, and they were failing spectacularly. The next escalation came a week later, in the sterile, glass-walled conference room of the Preston Development corporate headquarters. The city sprawled below them, a tapestry of steel and glass that Richard Preston viewed as his personal chessboard. Clara and Amelia were there to present their firm's preliminary concept for the center. Amelia led the presentation, her voice polished and confident as she walked the Prestons through digital renderings of a beautiful, human-scaled building. It was a design rooted in Marcus Thorne's principles, elegant, understated, filled with natural light, and designed to foster community and creativity. It was a building that listened to its surroundings rather than shouting at them. Richard Preston stared at the main rendering on the large screen, his face a mask of profound disappointment. He leaned back in his leather chair, a throne from which he passed judgment, and steepled his fingers. Julian sat beside him, mirroring the pose with less authority, like a prince practicing to be king. "Is this it?" Richard finally asked, the question dropping into the room like a stone. Amelia faltered. "This is the preliminary concept, yes. It focuses on sustainable materials, public access, and creating a dialogue with the adjacent park." "Dialogue," Richard interrupted, tasting the word with distaste. "I don't want dialogue. I want a statement. I told you, I want a beacon." He gestured dismissively at the screen. This is a community center. A very expensive, very well-designed community center. It's humble." He said the word as if it were a terminal disease. Julian chimed in, eager to reinforce his father's position. "It's not iconic. There's no wow factor. Where's the drama? It looks like something you'd find in Scandinavia. It's too quiet." "The design's strength is in its quietness," Clara spoke up, her voice steady. She had remained silent until now, observing. "It's designed to endure. Trends in wow factor change, but classic, functional design lasts. It respects the art that will be housed inside it, rather than competing with it." Richard Preston turned his full, formidable attention to her. It was the look of a predator that had just noticed a smaller creature daring to occupy its space. "Miss Vance, wasn't it? The idealist from the dinner party." He didn't smile. "You're still a junior designer, I presume?" "I'm part of the design team," Clara answered evenly, refusing to take the bait. "Let me give you a lesson in real-world economics, Miss Vance," Richard said, leaning forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "Quiet doesn't sell naming rights. Humble doesn't attract billionaire donors. Enduring is a word architects use to justify boring buildings that don't get them on the cover of magazines. I am spending $1 billion to put my family's name on a building. It will be the opposite of quiet." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to them. "I want glass. I want height. I want something twisting, something dramatic, something that people will drive across the city just to take a picture of. Your competitor, the firm led by Jean-Pierre Dubois, understands that. He's talking about a crystalline spire. A shard of light, he calls it. That's branding. That's a vision. That's also a vision that will have astronomical climate control costs and create a wind tunnel effect in the public plaza," Clara said calmly. "The western-facing glass will create a blinding glare for half the day, rendering the park space unusable in the afternoon. Structurally, a design like that prioritizes form over function to a degree that requires massive, inefficient internal supports, reducing usable floor space by an estimated 15%. She spoke with the unassailable confidence of someone who had not just studied the problem, but had already solved it. She had run the simulations herself, late at night in her office, the one no one at the firm knew was the original office of Marcus Thorne himself. Julian snorted. Here we go, the thoughtful designer. We're talking about a legacy, and you're talking about the electric bill. A legacy that ignores its impact on the community and the environment isn't a legacy, it's a monument to irresponsibility, Clara countered, her gaze fixed on Richard. Marcus Thorne taught me that a building's first duty is to be a good neighbor. Richard turned from the window, a slow, dangerous smile finally appearing on his face. It was the smile of a man who believed he was about to deliver a killing blow. Marcus Thorne is dead. His philosophies, as noble as you find them, are buried with him. This is my project, my money, my city, and I'm telling you, this design is rejected, utterly. He looked at Amelia, his expression softening fractionally. Amelia, I believe you have talent, but you are shackled to an outdated, sentimental philosophy. I'm giving your firm one more chance. Come back to us in 2 weeks, and when you do, I want to see a new design. Something bold, something that I want. And I suggest you leave Miss Vance and her tutorials on public service behind. The threat was clear. Get rid of Clara or lose the contract. Amelia was pale. She looked from Richard's implacable face to Clara's calm one. The choice was being forced upon her. We understand, Mr. Preston, she stammered. We will deliver something extraordinary, I promise. As they packed their presentation materials in a humiliating silence, Clara could feel the smug satisfaction radiating from Richard and Julian. They believed they had won. They had asserted their dominance, crushed a lesser opponent, and bent the world to their will. In the elevator ride down, Amelia finally exploded. What was that, Clara? Are you trying to sabotage this? Everything he said, you had a counter-argument. You made him feel stupid, and people like Richard Preston do not tolerate feeling stupid. I told him the truth, Clara said, looking at the descending floor numbers. The design is sound. Their objections are based on ego, not on architectural principles. I don't care. Amelia's voice was sharp with panic. This isn't a university debate. This is business. He is the client. We are supposed to give him what he wants. Our job is to give him the best building possible, even if he doesn't know what that is. Clara's calm was a stark contrast to Amelia's rising hysteria. He's going to make me fire you, or at least take you off the project, Amelia said, her eyes welling with tears. This is my one chance, Clara. My whole career. Julian, this is everything. Clara looked at her friend. Then you will have to make a choice, won't you? When they stepped out into the lobby, a vast, soulless space of marble and chrome, Amelia walked ahead without looking back, a clear signal that she had already begun to make that choice. Clara paused, her hand going instinctively to the clutch that held the silver pen. She wasn't angry, she was calculating. Richard Preston had made a critical error. He had mistaken her defense of principle for the naive idealism of a subordinate. He had failed to understand that she was not arguing for Marcus Thorne's philosophy. She was defending her own. And she was not an employee to be dismissed. She was a force to be reckoned with, an owner, a gatekeeper. And the gate she kept was the one on which his entire legacy depended. He had demanded a statement. He had no idea what a powerful statement she was about to make. The 2 weeks that followed were a study in contrasts. For the Preston family, it was a period of triumphant certainty. Richard had successfully imposed his will, a feat that always invigorated him. He and Julian met with the rival architect, Jean-Pierre Dubois, fanning the flames of his ego and encouraging his most flamboyant impulses. Dubois, a man whose personal style was as loud as his buildings, promised them a symphony of glass and titanium, a structure that would pierce the heavens. The Prestons were delighted. They spoke of the groundbreaking ceremony as a certainty, and Eleanor began planning a gala that would be the social event of the decade. At a lavish charity auction held at the city's most exclusive hotel, Eleanor found the perfect opportunity to deliver what she considered the final, definitive blow in her quiet war against Clara Vance. She knew Sterling and Thorne would have a corporate table, and she made a point of seating them in a far corner of the ballroom, a social Siberia. Clara attended, dressed once again in an elegant but understated charcoal gown. Amelia, by contrast, was at the Prestons' front and center table, radiant in a red sequin dress, laughing at Julian's jokes. The distance between the two friends was now a physical reality, a chasm across a crowded room. During a lull in the auction, Eleanor took the stage, ostensibly to thank the major donors. She gave a flowing speech about philanthropy and community, her voice resonating with practiced sincerity. Then she paused, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know," she began, as if struck by a sudden inspiration, "it's one thing to give money, but it's another thing entirely to give of oneself, to create beauty that enriches us all. We are embarking on such a project, the Preston Center, which will be a gift to this city for generations." A polite ripple of applause went through the room. "And in a project of this magnitude," she continued, her eyes scanning the room and landing, with pinpoint accuracy, on Clara, "one learns the difference between true visionaries and the diligent people who help bring those visions to life. It takes a certain kind of courage to dream on a grand scale, a scale some people can't even comprehend." Her gaze lingered on Clara for a moment longer than was comfortable. It was a master class in public humiliation, delivered with a smile. She was framing Clara, in front of hundreds of the city's most powerful people, as a small-minded functionary, incapable of grand thought. Several people at nearby tables followed Eleanor's gaze, their expressions ranging from pity to mild curiosity. They saw a young woman, alone at a distant table, being subtly admonished by the city's reigning social queen. Clara did not look away. She did not blush or drop her gaze. She simply held Eleanor's stare, her expression unreadable. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine. In that moment, she was not the object of humiliation. She was an anthropologist, observing a specimen in its natural habitat. She saw a woman so consumed by the performance of status that she had become blind to actual power. Eleanor was playing checkers, moving her pieces with theatrical flair, entirely unaware that her opponent was playing chess on a board she couldn't even see. Later, as the event was winding down, Julian approached Clara's table. He had an arrogant swagger, amplified by champagne and the success of the evening. "Vance," he said, foregoing any pretense of politeness. "Tough night? Being stuck in the nosebleeds?" "The acoustics are surprisingly good back here," Clara replied, her tone light. "You can hear everything perfectly." He smirked, missing the double meaning. "Listen, Amelia's come up with some incredible new stuff for the presentation. She's really got the right idea, now that she's not being held back by all that academic nonsense." "I'm sure her new designs are very accommodating," Clara said. "They're spectacular, that's what they are," he corrected her sharply. "Dad's going to be blown away. You and your old-fashioned mentor. You're about to become a footnote." He walked away, rejoining his family who were accepting congratulations like royalty. A footnote. The word echoed in Clara's mind. It was the second time a Preston had tried to consign her and Marcus Thorne to the dustbin of history. Meanwhile, in the quiet solitude of her own world, Clara was not idle. She was not redesigning a building to satisfy a client's ego. She was preparing for a war. Her evenings were spent not in ballrooms, but in the hushed, wood-paneled archive room of the firm. This room, known to the staff as the morgue, where old project files were stored, was in fact the heart of Marcus Thorne's legacy. It contained every contract, every deed, every piece of correspondence from his 50-year career, and it contained the master file for the parcel of land designated as Sector Gamma 7, the future site of the Preston Center. She sat at Marcus's old oak desk, the room smelling faintly of old paper and leather. Under the warm glow of a green banker's lamp, she spread out the original land trust agreement, a document almost a century old. Marcus's father had acquired the land, a disused industrial plot, with a vision of one day turning it into a public park. When that became unfeasible, Marcus had converted the ownership into a land trust with a long-term lease, managed by the Thorne estate. Sterling and Thorne had leased it to the City Development Authority, who in turn had subleased it to Preston Development for their new project. It was a chain of contracts, a legal labyrinth. Clara's finger traced a line of dense, legal text. Her heart did not beat faster. Her mind was a placid lake of concentration. She had read this document 100 times. She knew it better than the Preston's high-priced lawyers, who had likely given it a cursory review, focusing on financial terms and zoning regulations. They would have seen the name Thorne Land Trust and assumed it was just another faceless corporate entity to which they would pay a quarterly fee. They would have missed Clause 11, Section B, the Artistic and Community Integrity Covenant. The clause was a piece of pure Marcus Thorne. It was his philosophical fingerprint embedded in the legal bedrock of the deal. It stated in unambiguous terms that any structure built on the land must be of significant artistic merit, designed in harmony with the surrounding community, and must prioritize public good over private vanity. It was a morality clause for architecture. Crucially, it gave the Thorne Land Trust, and by extension, its sole executor, Clara Vance, the right to review and approve the final design. If the design was deemed to be in violation of the covenant, the trust had the absolute right to terminate the lease immediately. Termination of the lease would trigger a cascade of catastrophic failures for the Prestons. Their financing from the banking consortium was contingent on holding a valid, long-term lease on the land. If the lease vanished, so did the loan. Their construction contracts would be voided, but the penalty clauses would be triggered. They had leveraged their company, their personal assets, everything on this project. Losing the land wouldn't just mean the end of the Preston Center, it would mean the end of the Prestons. Clara took the silver pen from her bag. It was a simple, elegant instrument, perfectly balanced. She unscrewed the cap and placed it carefully on the desk beside the contract. She wasn't a vengeful person. Marcus had taught her that integrity was a quiet fortress, not a sharpened spear. But he had also taught her that there were times when one had to defend that fortress against barbarians. The Prestons, with their casual cruelty and their worship of surfaces, were barbarians at the gate. They had dismissed her, insulted her mentor, and tried to corrupt her friend. They had mistaken her patience for weakness and her silence for consent. She closed the file. The new presentation was in 3 days. Amelia would present her compromised, spectacular design. The Prestons would gloat. They would formally reject Sterling and Thorne's original vision and announce their partnership with Jean-Pierre Dubois. They would believe they were at the peak of their power, on the verge of cementing their legacy. And Clara would be there, sitting quietly in the back of the room, a footnote waiting for her turn to speak. The day of the final presentation arrived, heavy with a sense of impending climax. The sky over the city was a sheet of brushed steel, threatening rain. The atmosphere inside the Preston Development boardroom was, by contrast, one of sunny, unassailable confidence. Richard Preston sat at the head of the table, flanked by Julian. His lawyers were present, as were several grim-faced executives from the banking consortium that was financing the project. It was a show of force, a room packed with power. Amelia stood at the podium, her face pale but determined. Clara had taken a seat against the back wall, slightly away from the main table, as Richard had suggested. She had a simple leather portfolio on her lap. To anyone watching, she was exactly as Richard had defined her, a junior associate, present to observe and take notes, a peripheral figure on the edge of a major decision. Her presence was a final, small courtesy before her firm was officially dismissed. "Amelia," Richard began, his voice expansive, "we are all eager to see what you've brought us. I trust you've taken our notes to heart." "Yes, Mr. Preston," Amelia said. She launched into her presentation. On the screen, a new building bloomed. It was everything the Prestons had asked for. A twisting, asymmetrical tower of glass that clawed at the sky. It was dramatic, ostentatious, and bore no resemblance to the thoughtful, human-centric design they had first proposed. It was a monument to ego. It was, in Clara's private opinion, an architectural monstrosity. "We're calling it the Aspire," Amelia announced, her voice gaining strength. "It's designed to be a landmark visible from every corner of the city, a beacon of artistic ambition." Julian nodded enthusiastically. "Now that's a wow factor. That's iconic." Richard Preston smiled, a slow, deeply satisfied smile. He had won. He had broken the firm's will and bent them to his vision. "Excellent, Amelia, truly excellent. You have shown that you are a pragmatist, a valuable quality." He glanced toward the back of the room, a flicker of triumph in his eyes as he met Clara's gaze. He was making sure she understood her defeat. Clara simply watched, her expression serene. She felt a pang of sorrow for Amelia, who had sacrificed a piece of her professional soul for this empty praise. When Amelia's presentation concluded, Richard clapped his hands together softly. "Well done. A remarkable turnaround. It shows what's possible when you're free from restrictive ideologies." He then turned to the room at large. "This confirms my decision. While we appreciate the work of Sterling and Thorne, their initial vision was not aligned with our own. We will be moving forward with a different partner, one whose aesthetic is more suited to a project of this scale." He was about to formally dismiss them when a quiet voice spoke from the back of the room. "Mr. Preston?" It was Clara. She hadn't raised her voice, but it cut through the murmuring in the room with surgical precision. All eyes turned to her. Richard Preston looked annoyed, as if a servant had interrupted dinner. "Miss Vance, do you have something to add? I believe we're concluded here." "I do, actually," Clara said. She stood up, her movements unhurried. "I have a few questions, if I may. First, for your legal counsel." She looked at the two lawyers, who exchanged a confused glance. "Are you familiar with Clause 11, Section B of the Thorne Land Trust Agreement for Sector Gamma 7? One of the lawyers, a man named Henderson, frowned. "The land lease? We reviewed it. Standard terms." "Clause 11, Section B," Clara repeated, her voice perfectly even. "The Artistic and Community Integrity Covenant. It gives the trust full and final approval over any design built on the property. Are you aware of that?" Henderson's frown deepened. He began shuffling through the papers in his briefcase, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "There may have been some legacy clauses. Typically, they're unenforceable. This one is not," Clara stated. "My second question is for the representatives from the bank." She turned her calm gaze to the financiers. "Is your $1 billion loan facility contingent on Preston Development holding a valid, unbreachable, long-term lease on the development site?" The lead banker, a stern-faced man named Peterson, nodded slowly. "Of course. The land is the primary collateral. A secure lease is non-negotiable." "Thank you," Clara said. She then turned her full attention back to Richard Preston, who was now watching her with a dawning sense of unease, his triumphant mood evaporating like mist. "And my final question is for you, Mr. Preston," she said. "You just described my mentor's philosophy as a restrictive ideology and called his life's work outdated. You have repeatedly mistaken integrity for weakness and patience for submission. My question is this: did you ever, for a single moment, consider who you were talking to?" A heavy silence filled the room. Richard stared at her, his mind racing, trying to connect the pieces. The land trust. The clause. This quiet, defiant young woman who seemed to know more than his own lawyers. "I don't know what game you're playing, Miss Vance," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "but it's over." "On the contrary, Mr. Preston," Clara replied, taking a step forward into the center of the room. "It's just beginning." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "My name is Clara Vance. I am the lead design principal and the silent majority partner of Sterling and Thorne." A gasp came from Amelia's direction. The lawyers stopped shuffling papers and stared at her, dumbfounded. 2 years ago, upon his death, Marcus Thorne, my mentor and legal guardian since I was 10 years old, left his entire estate to me. That includes his controlling interest in the firm. She let that sink in. And it also includes sole executorship of the Thorne Land Trust. She looked around the room, meeting the stunned gaze of every person present. "Which means," she concluded, her voice dropping to a soft, devastating whisper, "that I am the owner of the land your entire legacy is supposed to be built on. And as the owner, I am telling you that this design," she gestured to the garish image of the Aspire still glowing on the screen, "is a grotesque violation of the integrity covenant. It is a monument to vanity that is actively hostile to the community it purports to serve. It is, in short, rejected, utterly." She used his own words against him, turning them into a verdict. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where the Prestons' power and certainty had been just moments before. Eleanor Preston, who had come to witness the triumph, sat frozen in her chair, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. Julian's jaw was slack, his smug expression replaced by one of pure, uncomprehending shock. Richard Preston's face had gone from ruddy confidence to a pale, mottled gray. The room, which he had commanded so completely, had suddenly turned against him. The bankers were looking at him with cold, calculating eyes. His own lawyers looked terrified. This is absurd," Richard finally managed to say, his voice a hoarse rasp. "You're a junior architect. We checked." "I prefer to keep a low profile," Clara said. "I find it allows me to see people for who they truly are. It's been very educational." She opened the leather portfolio she had been carrying. She didn't produce a stack of documents. She slid out a single, elegant sheet of paper and the silver fountain pen. "This is a formal notice of intent to terminate the lease agreement for Sector Gamma 7, effective in 30 days, citing breach of Clause 11B. All it requires is my signature." She placed the paper on the polished table. The pen lay beside it, a simple object that now held the power of financial annihilation. The quietest thing in the room had become the most powerful. The immediate aftermath was a symphony of suppressed panic. The air in the boardroom grew thick and hard to breathe. Richard Preston stared at the single sheet of paper on the table, then at Clara. His mind, usually so quick and decisive, was short-circuiting. He saw his billion-dollar project, his legacy, his family's future, all balanced on the tip of a silver fountain pen held by a woman he had dismissed as a nobody. "You can't do this," he blustered, his voice lacking its usual authority. It was the desperate gambit of a king who finds himself suddenly checkmated. "We have a contract." "You have a contract that you have violated," Clara corrected him gently. "You and your lawyers were so focused on the financial clauses that you overlooked the moral one. Marcus Thorne built morality into the very foundations of his work. You thought that was a weakness. It was, in fact, his greatest strength. And now, it is mine." Henderson, the senior lawyer, finally found his voice, though it was strained. "Ms. Vance, perhaps we can discuss this. A covenant like that, there are interpretations. It's subjective." "Is it?" Clara asked, her eyebrows raised in polite inquiry. "Let's review. The clause requires a design of significant artistic merit. Your own chosen architect, Jean-Pierre Dubois, is currently under investigation in 2 countries for structural failures related to his spectacular designs. It requires the building to be in harmony with the surrounding community. This Aspire Tower would cast a shadow over a public park for 6 hours a day and create documented hazardous wind conditions. And finally, it must prioritize public good over private vanity. Mr. Preston, your husband has stated on record multiple times that the sole purpose of this building is to be a statement for his family's name. I would say the violation is not subjective at all. It is flagrant. The bankers were now whispering urgently amongst themselves. Peterson, the lead financier, cleared his throat. "Mr. Preston," he said, his tone icy, "is what Miss Vance saying true? Does she control the land trust?" Before Richard could answer, Clara spoke again. "I have all the relevant incorporation papers and trust documents here," she said, tapping her portfolio. "Certified and notarized this morning. I assure you my position is unassailable." The blood drained from Richard's face. He knew he was beaten. He looked at his son Julian, who seemed to have shrunk in his chair, his bravado utterly gone. He looked at his wife Eleanor, whose carefully constructed mask of social superiority had shattered, revealing the raw panic beneath. She looked old and frightened. This was the moment Clara had been waiting for, the moment of the moral mirror. She did not raise her voice. She did not gloat. She simply held up a reflection of their own behavior, forcing them to see themselves clearly for the first time. "This isn't about money," she said, her voice filling the silent room. "This is about respect. From the moment I met you, you have treated me and the legacy I represent with nothing but contempt." She looked directly at Eleanor. "At your dinner party, you mocked my clothes as merely functional, implying that I was simple and without artistry. You failed to understand that the most beautiful things in the world, a bridge, a heart, a promise, are defined by their function." She turned to Julian. "At the charity event, you called my mentor's work a footnote, something to be left behind. You championed a style that is all surface and no substance, a perfect reflection of a philosophy that values image over integrity." Finally, she faced Richard. "And you called me a junior designer. You lectured me on the real world as if principles were a childish indulgence. You told me Marcus Thorne's philosophies were dead and buried. You tried to force my friend and colleague to betray her own design ethics to satisfy your ego. You demanded a beacon, a statement, but the only statement you have made is one of profound arrogance." She paused, letting the list of grievances hang in the air, each one a testament to their blindness. "You did all of this because you judged me by my title, by my dress, by my quiet demeanor. You never once thought to ask who I was. You assumed I was powerless, and therefore you assumed I was worthless. That is your fatal flaw, not just as people, but as builders. You look at a piece of land and see only its value. You look at a person and see only their status. You have no appreciation for what lies beneath the surface. And it is what lies beneath the surface that is about to ruin you." The word ruin landed with the finality of a gavel. Richard Preston, a man who had intimidated and overpowered opponents his entire life, finally broke. He sank back into his chair, looking utterly defeated. "What do you want?" he asked, the words barely a whisper. "Money? A bigger stake?" Clara shook her head slowly. "I told you, this isn't about money." She picked up the pen. The room held its breath. She didn't sign the paper. She held the pen in her hand, its cool silver a conduit of power. "I am going to give you a choice," she said. "The choice I should have given you at the beginning, before you revealed the true nature of your character. Option A. I sign this paper. Your lease is terminated. Your financing evaporates. Your company, which I know is leveraged to the absolute limit, collapses within a month. You will be bankrupt. Your name will not be a legacy. It will be a cautionary tale of hubris. You will lose everything. She let the horror of that prospect settle. She could see it in their eyes, the frantic calculation, the terror. Or, she continued, her voice softening slightly, option B, you will build our original design, the one you called humble and quiet. You will build it to the exact specifications laid out by Marcus Thorne, with the highest quality materials, regardless of cost. You will issue a public statement read by you, Mr. Preston, apologizing for your initial dismissal of the design and praising the visionary genius of Marcus Thorne's philosophy of public service in architecture. You will cede all creative control to my firm. The building will not be called the Preston Center. It will be called the Thorne Center for the Arts. Your name will appear only on a small, discreet plaque near the entrance, listing you as a patron. She leaned forward slightly. You will build my mentor's legacy, not your own, and you will do it with your money. It will likely cost you a significant portion of your fortune, but you will avoid total ruin. You will survive, humbled but intact. She placed the pen back down on the table, perfectly centered next to the termination notice. The choice is yours, pride or survival. You have 24 hours to decide. Without another word, she gathered her portfolio, turned, and walked out of the room. She didn't look back at Amelia, who was staring at her with an expression of awe and terror. She didn't look at the shattered family she left in her wake. The sound of her footsteps on the marble floor of the hallway was the only sound in the world. She had made her statement. Now, she would wait for their answer. The 24 hours that followed were the longest of the Prestons' lives. Their fortress of arrogance, once so impenetrable, had been breached and its foundations shattered. The boardroom, a symbol of their power, became their prison. Richard, Eleanor, and Julian remained there for hours after Clara's departure, the bankers and lawyers having retreated to give them space, their cold, expectant silence a pressure cooker. Richard, for the first time in his adult life, was adrift. His usual tools, intimidation, wealth, and force of will, were useless. He had been outmaneuvered on a field he didn't even know existed. He paced the length of the room, his movements agitated, the picture of a caged lion. "We fight her," he snarled, the words a reflex, a ghost of his former self. "We get Henderson to tie this up in court for years. We challenge the validity of the trust, the clause, her executorship." Henderson, who had been frantically conferring with his partners via text, shook his head grimly. "Richard, we can't. We've done a deep dive. The trust is ironclad. The covenant is valid, and her claim is absolute. A court battle would be a catastrophic waste of money. The bank will pull your financing the moment we file a lawsuit, because it signals an unstable project. She has you, cornered and checkmated." Eleanor, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally spoke, her voice thin and brittle. "This is that girl's fault, that quiet, mousy little thing. How could she do this to us?" It was not a question, but a lament. She was incapable of seeing their own role in the disaster. To her, this was a personal attack from an inferior, an act of cosmic injustice. "Our name, the Preston Center. I've already spoken to the caterers for the gala." Julian, who had been staring blankly at the tabletop, looked up at his mother, his face a mask of despair. "Mother, do you not understand? There is no gala. There is no Preston Center. She is going to ruin us. We'll be nothing. We'll have to sell the house, the cars, everything." The reality of his own spoiled existence being threatened finally penetrated his thick skull. The argument raged for hours. Pride versus pragmatism. Richard roared about his legacy, his name, his refusal to be humiliated by a slip of a girl. Eleanor wept for her social standing. Julian cycled between panicked outbursts and sullen silence. The family unit, built on a foundation of shared ambition and mutual reinforcement of their own superiority, was crumbling under pressure. Meanwhile, Amelia had fled the Preston building in a daze. She sat in her car in the parking garage, the engine off, replaying the scene in the boardroom over and over. Clara wasn't a junior designer. She was the firm. She was the owner of the land. She was Marcus Thorne's heir. The secrets were so immense, so foundational, that Amelia felt dizzy. She saw now that every interaction, every quiet smile from Clara, every patient response, had been layered with a knowledge she couldn't have fathomed. She had seen Clara's dignity as passivity. She had seen her principled stand as professional suicide. She had been just as blind as the Prestons. Worse, she had abandoned her friend, her colleague, for a seat at their table, a table that had just been violently overturned. Shame washed over her, hot and sickening. She had chosen the losing side, but more than that, she had chosen the wrong side. The next morning, less than an hour before the deadline, Clara's phone rang. It was Richard Preston. His voice was stripped of all its former bluster. It was the voice of a defeated man. "Vance," he said. The use of her last name was no longer a dismissal, but a sign of grudging respect. "We accept your terms. Option B." "All of them?" Clara asked, her voice calm. "Including the public statement and the renaming of the center?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Clara could hear the sound of a man swallowing his own pride. It was a bitter pill. "Yes," he finally ground out. "All of them." "Very well," Clara said. "My lawyers will be in touch with yours to draft the new agreements. I expect construction to begin on the original Thorne design within 60 days. And Mr. Preston, do not for a second think you can deviate from the plan. I will be watching every single step." She hung up. She felt no rush of triumph, no thrill of victory, only a quiet, somber sense of resolution. She had defended her mentor's legacy. She had enforced a lesson in humility. The outcome was just, but the process had been ugly. Weeks later, the consequences of that day continued to ripple outwards. The Preston Empire had survived, but it was diminished, humbled. The public announcement was a brutal affair for Richard. He stood at a podium, his face ashen, and read a prepared statement. He spoke of his initial misunderstanding of the project's scope and praised the timeless, community-focused vision of the late Marcus Thorne. He announced that the project would now be known as the Thorne Center for the Arts, and that his family was honored to be patrons. The city's business community was stunned. The story that circulated was one of a powerful developer being brought to heel by an obscure clause and a surprisingly powerful estate. The full truth of Clara's identity remained a closely guarded secret among the few who had been in that boardroom. Eleanor Preston retreated from public life entirely. The shame of the reversal was too much for her to bear. Her social kingdom had been built on the perception of unassailable power. With that perception shattered, her reign was over. Julian, stripped of his unearned arrogance, was given a low-level project management role on the new construction site. His father had told him he would learn the business from the ground up, this time with a dose of humility. His relationship with Amelia had disintegrated the day of the revelation. He blamed her for not knowing, for bringing the Trojan horse into their camp. One afternoon, Amelia appeared at the door of Clara's office, the large, sunlit corner office that had once been Marcus Thorne's. She looked smaller, her usual confident energy gone. "Clara," she said, her voice quiet, "can I talk to you?" Clara gestured to a chair. Amelia sat, her hands twisting in her lap. "I don't know what to say. I'm sorry feels ridiculously small." "It's a start," Clara said, her expression not unkind. "I was so focused on what I wanted, the project, the prestige, Julian, that I couldn't see what was right in front of me," Amelia confessed, tears welling in her eyes. "You tried to tell me about building on a strong foundation. I didn't listen. I was arrogant too. I judged you. I thought you were being naive, and all along, you were the one with all the power." "The power wasn't the point, Amelia," Clara said gently. "The principles were. The power was just the tool I had to use to defend them. I wish I hadn't had to." I know, Amelia whispered. I saw your face when you left that room. You didn't look happy. You just looked sad. I was sad for you, Clara admitted, and for what the Prestons could have been if they weren't so blinded by their own reflections. It was all such a waste. A long silence sat between them. Can I earn my way back? Amelia finally asked, her voice full of trepidation. Not to be your friend. I know I don't deserve that yet, but to be a good architect again. To work on this project the right way. Clara looked at her for a long moment. She saw genuine remorse in Amelia's eyes. A painful, hard-won lesson had been learned. The first design, Clara said, the one we presented in that boardroom, it was good work, Amelia, your work, before you compromised it. That's the architect I need on this project. A single tear rolled down Amelia's cheek, but this one was of relief. Thank you, Clara. I won't let you down again. Clara nodded. I know you won't. The foundation of a new kind of relationship had been laid. It wasn't the easy friendship they had before, but something stronger, tempered by fire and built on a new, shared understanding of what truly mattered. The healing had begun. 1 year later, the city skyline was changing. The Thorne Center for the Arts was rising, not as a jagged shard of glass, but as an elegant, harmonious structure of stone and lightwood. It was a building that felt as if it had always belonged there, its clean lines and warm materials a welcome embrace rather than an arrogant proclamation. It was already being hailed by critics as a masterpiece of neo-modernist design, a fitting tribute to the legacy of Marcus Thorne. Clara stood on the top floor, an open-air terrace that looked out over the city in the adjacent park. The wind was gentle here, the design of the building carefully crafted to diffuse and soften the gusts. Below, the park was filled with people, enjoying the late afternoon sun, unbothered by glare or shadow. The building was being a good neighbor. She was no longer a secret. The story had eventually emerged, piece by piece, and she was now celebrated as the visionary architect who had saved the project, the worthy heir to a great master. But she wore the acclaim lightly. It was the work that mattered, not the recognition. Richard Preston was a changed man. He was often on site, his face weathered, his shoulders a little stooped. He had lost a fortune, but he had, paradoxically, gained a measure of self-respect. He spoke quietly with the foreman, his focus on the quality of the concrete pour, the fit of the window joints. He was learning to appreciate substance over show. One afternoon, he had found Clara on site and simply said, he would have been proud of this building, and of you. It was the closest he could come to a full apology, and Clara accepted it as such. Amelia was by Clara's side, now her lead project manager and her most trusted colleague. Their friendship had been rebuilt, stronger and more honest than before. They worked as partners, their shared vision for the building a silent bond between them. Clara ran her hand along the cool, smooth stone of the parapet. She thought of the Prestons' initial vision, their desire for a monument to themselves, and she looked at the building taking shape around her, a place designed for people, for art, for community. It was a testament to the idea that true strength lies not in dominance, but in service, not in shouting your own name, but in creating something that will quietly and beautifully outlast you. The silver pen was in her jacket pocket. She rarely used it for contracts anymore. She used it for sketching, for jotting down ideas in her notebook, for the simple, quiet act of creation. Its power was not in what it could destroy, but in what it could build. This story is a powerful reminder that a person's worth is not determined by their status, their title, or the clothes they wear. It's measured by their integrity, their character, and the strength of their convictions. The Prestons believed that power was loud, but Clara showed them that true power is often silent, patient, and rooted in unshakable principle. She didn't just win a contract, she taught a lesson about the enduring value of substance over spectacle. What do you think? Have you ever been in a situation where you were underestimated? Let us know in the comments below. We read every one of them, and your stories inspire us. If this message resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more stories of quiet strength and satisfying justice. Thank you for watching, and remember, be the kind of person whose character is their strongest asset.